after a tribute to the late Richard Harris. From 1973, his appearance on Parkinson.
Evening and welcome. Tonight, a one-man show with a very singular person. He started life as a rat catcher of all things and ended up a superstar of the screen. In between times, he's distinguished himself on stage, raised hell in various premises, both licensed and unlicensed, written poetry and sung songs. Who else fits that description except my special guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Harris. I like the shirt.
Football shirt.
Yeah, you're kidding. Yeah.
It is, yeah. I oh my God. Isn't it terrifying? I've done so many shows, plays, concerts, and I'm dying with nerves.
Really?
Yeah, it's terrible. Anyway, I bought this. You see, they're cheaper than wearing suits.
Yeah.
When you go out in the night for a drink.
Yeah.
Or you fall down on the street, or whatever you do, and it's cheaper. You see, I'm sort of Librian, you know, and sometimes when you go into a bar, I hate to see things disjointed, unless I do it myself. So if I see sort of and the bar is wet, and I order a drink, I've got a habit of doing that, and wiping it up,
yeah.
See, and ruining my jacket, and ruining my cashmere sweater. So I took to wearing football jerseys. 30 bob a time, it's cheaper, you see.
Do you ever get stopped at the door, though, at certain restaurants without the tie and things, or...?
No, I don't go to places like that.
You don't?
No. Contrary to my reputation, I avoid trouble as much as possible. I haven't been too successful.
That's true, yeah.
But I do, though. I tell you a funny thing. I shouldn't say this really, actually. I went home to Ireland last week to see Ireland play New Zealand, right? And I had all these bunch of football jerseys, I don't know, 4 or 5 dozen. And I put 3 or 4 into the bag because I knew it was going to be one of those weekends in Ireland, you know. I call Dublin the glue pot. Once you get there, you can't get out of it, you see. So I prepared myself for a long, long weekend. So I put all these jerseys on, and I put one on, and I'm in the plane, and Aer Lingus, and it's flying back to Dublin. I took my coat off, my overcoat off, and I'm talking to a chap, and he said, how is it now? He said, an actor who's obviously extremely wealthy wears a 30-shilling football jersey. So I went through the whole thing about why I did it, you see. He said, oh, I see. He said, but don't you think, he said, that you've picked the wrong colours? And I looked at my football jersey, and it was red, white, and blue.
That's true.
Can you believe it? I'm going back to Dublin for a football match, red, white, and blue. So quickly I dashed down to the toilet, stripped it off, you see, and put my coat on, and arrived in Dublin naked.
Naked but safe.
Naked but safe.
All right. Richard, I mentioned in the introduction there something else that I didn't know about you until I started reading the research, and that's that you started life as this rat catcher. What was
well,
that
I tell you what it was. You see, unlike most of the sort of actors today, the successful actors anyway today, they all come from working class backgrounds and that. You do too, don't you?
Yes.
Class backgrounds.
Yes. But I'm not a successful actor.
What? No, but you're very successful.
Oh, yes. Mm.
And I anyway, my family weren't, you see, at all. My family were very rich. My great-grandparents were extremely wealthy. We had flour mills and baking powder mills and bakeries and so forth, etc. Like this. And anyway, when I left school, I wasn't extremely successful at school. You know, I'll tell you that there was a special class in my school that was invented for 11 boys. You see, I was brought up a Jesuit, Catholic, and they're very proud of their sort of academical honors and the students they sent out to the world. And there were 11 of us this particular time in this particular school that they couldn't kick us out really, and they didn't want us in the school, so they invented a class just for the 11 boys that was totally non-existent. Even today, if you go back to the school, you'll be told the class didn't exist, and these boys didn't exist. In fact, I remember well that an American journalist went home to Limerick some time ago to do a story on me, a life story. And she, obviously, and she went up and she knocked at the school door and she asked to speak to the prefect of studies. So he came down, he said, didn't Dickie Harris go to school here? And he said, why? She said, well, I'm doing an article for American magazine. And he said, I'd prefer you didn't mention. him in relation to this school. That's true, and we used to get these school reports, we used to get these school reports, and I have ones that I haven't shown to my sons, the school reports, in which, you know, that at the end of every term they sent back how you're doing academically in school, and this, you know, said, this was a Christmas term, and it said, mathematics out of 100, 2, you know, French out of 100, 1, algebra out of 100, and that meant he didn't turn up, you know. And so there wasn't a pass in the accumulation of all the numbers. There wasn't 40% in the entire thing, right? And my father had signed the end. He's obliged to sign the end and tear it out and send it back to the school. So he didn't bother at the end, and he just said, "Dear Reverend Father McLaughlin, Prefect of Studies, I am very pleased with my son Dickie's progress at your school." That was his reply, right, you see. But so anyway, when I left school, he said, well, what was I going to do? So my father said, "We'll go into the business." So you hop into the business. So that wasn't much I could do, really. But they did huge, big barns and lofts. And I spent my day going around with a stick, you see, frightening the mice away from the flour. Whoosh, 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 you see, like this. And anyway, I remember when he finally got rid of me was that I thought that all his workers and millers and all that were sort of underpaid. You know, I thought, even then, I thought that they weren't being paid enough. So I brought them all out on strike against my father. And they paraded outside with signs like, "Your son said we should have more money." Sorry, go on. No, go on. So anyway, he got rid of me.
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, that sounds marvellous training for a trade union leader, but not for an actor. Where did the acting thing start, Richard?
Well, when I left school, then I unfortunately, or indeed fortunately, as the case has turned out, because if I had my life to live again, I would not have wished to erase this period in which I got tuberculosis.
Really?
Yeah, and I was 3 years confined to bed, you know, and then I began to sort of study and read read an awful lot, and devour books, and studied acting and Stanislavski and that. And then I think the whole sort of inventiveness came to me when I began to sort of, do you know, it's a funny thing. I mean, I don't mean to be morbid or sentimental. I'm not being morbid or sentimental, but you know that illness is a great burden upon your friends. You know, because the first week or month, they all come and say, "Oh, you'll be up in a month, and you'll be up in a week," and they come and they pour in. And then after a couple of months, you've got 15 friends, and a couple of months you've got 6, and then you've got 3, you know, and then you have 1. And then you're on your Todd from that moment on. You either come at Christmas or birthdays, or they're looking for presents or giving presents, one or the other. And so I was kind of put on my own, and then eventually thrown on my own resources, and I used to invent people out of light bulbs. And I used to have conversations with people in light bulbs, and I invented hundreds of people coming in and talking, and I was sitting I was the King of England, or I was the Pope, or whatever. God, the Pope, can you imagine? There's a joke. Harris for Pope! Can you imagine? Wouldn't it be fantastic?
And that's how it all started?
Instant sin, instant absolution.
Sounds a good life.
It is indeed. But anyway, that's how it started. I began to invent these things. And then finally, when, you know, when I was cured, clear, I came over here and went to an academy.
But was it, I mean, do you have any entrance examinations to pass for that?
Well, you have to do what is commonly known as auditions. And that's a very funny story. Can I tell you?
Please.
Well, I arrived here, you see, and I studied some things when I was in bed. I studied Richard III and Cyrano de Bergerac and some things like that, you see. And then when I was going, first of all, I went to Central School, and you know, all the students are about 16 and 17. Now I was old then, you know, I was 23, I think, at that time. And it was the day of the pretty boy. You know, the fellas like me were told to stand back there and hold a spear or open a door for the guy that was pretty. You see? So it's all changed now, thanks be to God. It may drift back that way. I don't mind. I'm getting prettier anyway as I get older. So anyway, so I went for that audition in Central School. They kind of looked at me like that, and then I remember this fantastic huge big bench, and I had to come down and do my little piece, and then I walked down with all these sort of aristocratic English gentlemen sitting atop of glasses, and they were sort of looking back at me and saying, "Well, what are you going to do for us today, young man?" And I said, "I'll do a bit of Shakespeare." They went, "Shakespeare, an Irish." The Gravedigger maybe, but not Hamlet, they were saying. So anyway, I did my piece, my audition. They looked back and they said, "You know, what right do you think you have to come into our profession?" I looked up at him and I said, "The same right as you have to be up there judging me." You see, and then I was told, a little bell rang. See, and a little man came in, they did, out. So they put me out. And then I applied for an audition to Lambda. And I remember so funny, I was in Hyde Park and I was as nervous as anything. It was an afternoon. I had an audition at 9. No, I had an audition at 4 in the afternoon. And there I was in the middle of Hyde Park saying, I must rehearse this piece now here correctly. And there was an old man sitting down on a bench reading a newspaper. And Harris was going around the place, now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, and walking around the trees, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death, out, brief candle. And there was this little fella sitting down with his newspaper, looking up like that. That's crackers. So after a couple of minutes, my first intercourse with who? My first...
We'll talk about that later.
With police, in the bar. My first intercourse with the police was then. And I was going on, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death, out, brief candle. You all right, lad? I looked up, and there's a policeman over. You all right? I said, yes, thank you very much. It doesn't sound too good, does it? So I dashed back, I got into the academy, and I saw a little man standing at the door with glasses. And I dashed up. And I was now an hour and a half late. That was it. I missed the time and a taxi, and I finally got to the academy. And there was a little man there with glasses. And I said to him, oh my God, I said, quickly, take me to Michael McCorn, who was the principal of the academy. And he said, I am Michael McCorn. And I said, good, you've discovered me. You see? So then he said, the academy was full, he'd said. I said, you must take me, I said, because I have checked out the record of your academy, and you haven't had one success. Not one success out of this academy yet. Now, I am going to be the first success. So if I were you, I'd make a little place for me in there, and I'll do it. So I went in and did my auditions, and I got in. Years later, I met dear old Michael McCorn again, and we did a little drink. And I said, what was that audition like I did? He said, well, can I tell you? Truthfully, he said, it was the worst audition that I have ever sat through. And I said, why did you take me in? And he said, I took you in because any man with the gall and the cheek to stand up in front of examiners and to perform as badly as that has got to be a success.
When you said that to him, when you sort of blagged him on the stairs there, I mean, did you really mean what you said? Were you?
I did. I was certain.
You were certain. How can you be that certain, Richard?
Well, I think one has to think positively. Think thin, or think young. It hasn't done me any good. But however, I think you think positively, it will happen. And I remember, I tell you, that tomorrow, you were mentioning, before, we were chatting before, that tomorrow, it reminds me of a great story in the dressing room upstairs, that tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of Joan Littlewood's theatre.
That's right, and you worked with her.
And I worked with Joan for years. And she was really, everything I know, or whatever I'm supposed to know about acting, I learned it from this marvellous lady. But I was in Macbeth, and finally, after sort of being in the company for quite a bit and playing little parts here and there, she finally said, well, you have a good part now in Macbeth. You're going to play Ross in Macbeth. I said, oh, fabulous, wonderful, wonderful. So she said, so anyway, Shakespeare, I thought, me, Shakespeare, this is it. You see, this is really it. This is what I've been waiting for. So I wrote to all my friends in Ireland. I said, you must come. Harris is doing Shakespeare. We're going to show the English how Shakespeare should be performed, right? Come, I said, everybody come, mother, father, children, brothers, aunts, uncles, the rats from the firm, anything, the mice, all come. Bit out there in the front. So, indeed, the stones of Ireland opened up and relatives appeared from nowhere. And they flocked to Ireland, to theatre workshop. And Harris said, I was going home, like I had only about 4 lines in it. 4 or 5 lines in the play, right? I had 4 weeks to rehearse 4 lines. That, without being a mathematical genius, is 1 line a week, right? Right. So Harris is learning his 4 lines, going home with the train, going home with the bus, going to Hyde Park, thing, these 4 lines. I was going to be sensational. Anyway, came the opening night, and Harris had to stand back here and make an entrance with 2 other people. In between it, I had to walk down, say these 4 lines as best as I could, wave my arm, go off, and it was a modern version of Macbeth, and half the army go off stage right. With Harris, you see? So Harris is learning his lines, and suddenly he's standing at the back, and he's all dressed up in his uniform with his baton in his hand. He had to pull out his sword and do this to the audience, you see. So I stood back, and I'm ready to go, and I hear everybody sort of doing their lines, and I'm saying, everybody's watching me. We always think that, you see. Everybody's looking at that wonderful... Who's that fella back there at the back with the stuff? Nobody was watching Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. It was Harris at the back, you see. Marvellous, marvellous. So anyway, Harris goes on. Q is about to arrive. Can you follow me with the camera? This is a true story now. And the Q is about to arrive, and I'm standing back like this, you see, waiting with my little sword and my spear, and I'm ready. And suddenly my cue comes, and I take out the sword, and I rush up to the front of the stage, and stick out the sword like that. And I can't remember a line. Not a bloody line. And I could hear my mother out front say, isn't he marvellous? You do, I swear. I haven't got off? How am I going to get off? How am I going to get off? So I put up the sword like that, and I look at all the audience, and I went,